Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Rajka Milanovic Galbraith, who has successfully been leading women and their families to optimal health for over 2 decades as a board-certified family medicine doctor, from delivering babies to managing family care in the clinic and hospital. She is now a leading functional medicine MD, international speaker, mentor to physicians in functional medicine, and peak performance coach. Having overcome 2 autoimmune diseases along with debilitating fatigue gives her firsthand knowledge and empathy for the challenges that face her patients. As a woman and an entrepreneur, she's passionate about empowering women leaders to optimal health. Her ultimate goal is to empower women to optimal health and in turn have them empower their families and their tribes. She's an expert in resolving brain fog and environmental illness, as well as nutritional genomics. She coaches high-level professionals in peak performance and sees patients at the clinic she founded, Simply Health Institute, outside of Chicago, Illinois. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rajka.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie, or should I say Dr. Gray? Thanks for having me. I just love spreading the word, as you know, and now in history is more important than ever to make sure that our health is aligned and our health span equals our lifespan.
I totally agree. And for the listeners, I'm just going to admit I have a cold and a sore throat here. So hopefully my voice will sustain through this interview. I'm going to call my guest Dr. Rajka because I cannot pronounce her full name appropriately. So I'm sorry, Dr. Rajka, but I do want to hear from you, your story, as I mentioned in your bio. Can you tell us how you went from fatigue to really where you are today?
Yeah, I call it fatigue to fabulous. So it's one of the courses that I have on the back end too. But
love it.
You know, I had 3 dreams as a child. One was to become a doctor. So I had that dream since I was 5. And the second was to get married. I know that sounds cliche. And the third was to have kids. And if I could add a fourth, I'd say the fourth dream, I had a dream to one day own my own boutique practice and really treat people the way I would want to be treated, and then also to end up with great results. And along the way, I almost never achieved those dreams. So I was so fatigued. It was really difficult to get through a given day in residency. And, you know, I would fall asleep standing up at rock concerts. So I'm from Cleveland, and they inaugurated the inaugural concert was for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I remember Bruce Springsteen playing. I got floor seats. A friend gifted them to me. We went together and I was out cold. So during a full-blown concert. So, and I always joke, you can imagine what my love life was like if I couldn't stay awake on dates. And so I managed to get married, but it seemed like every turn of the corner when I wanted to achieve something, it was met with hiccups. And, you know, shortly after getting married, we said, okay, we're going to try to get pregnant. And given this diagnosis of unexplained fertility, and it just snowballed into all these symptoms. And I was just devastated. And I'll never forget in the clinic, I had delivered babies for 6 years and it got harder and harder to be happy. And I'm one of those people that I'm going to be happy for you regardless of what my situation is. But one day a woman came in and she wanted a pregnancy test and she told me a little of her story. And 6 of her 7 kids had been taken away by Child Protective Services because she was now a recovered cocaine addict. And when that test came back positive with her 8th child and she was pregnant, while I was happy for her because now she had cleaned up her life and was, you know, for all intents and purposes, is still caring for that child who's probably grown by now, my heart sank. I said, you know, how could she get pregnant and I do everything right and can't? And I could no longer, you know, I could no longer say that there's, you know, I can't accept this unexplained fertility diagnosis. So I did my own research and implemented probably what's very similar to a functional medicine protocol. And we got pregnant not once, but twice naturally. And then unfortunately, I wish I would have known what I knew now then, because it led to a whole host of symptoms. And the list of diagnoses went from vision, losing migraine. So I lost vision when I had a migraine and speech. I thought I was having a stroke, and went on to be PMS and endometriosis. And then it culminated where I was just really unwell and they were entertaining this second autoimmune disease. And we had lived abroad for a period of 8 years. And as a celebratory trip for all our hard work and efforts prior to transitioning back here to the United States, we had rented a little villa in Sri Lanka. It was like idyllic. And my kids were squealing, wow. Watch me, mama, watch me. And I was in liver dysfunction. So for all intents and purposes, liver failure. So my liver enzymes soared up into the mid 200s, which for those that don't know is about 6 to 7 times normal. And I felt it. And I thought, okay, this is how it ends. I have overcome all these things. And right at that moment, I was actually transitioning into functional medicine. I found a mentor who served as a guide, and he led me through the basic tenets of functional medicine. And I never got that diagnosis. And the disease they were entertaining was autoimmune hepatitis. And for those that don't know, if you truly have autoimmune hepatitis and you do not take steroids, the rate of death is 50% at 3 to 5 years without steroids. So never got the diagnosis, all those numbers reversed. Never ended up on steroids, and touch wood. Now it's been 8 or 9 years since that whole ordeal, and so I'm on this mission. I'm on this mission to spread the word wide and far, in small groups and large groups, to really prevent this needless suffering. And I've really targeted, your higher performing, your women that are leaders, that spread the word so they can empower their tribes. I can't tell you how many times I've been at just like a neighborhood gathering or a party or something, and someone knows what I do and they'll describe their symptoms, and I give them like 3 top tips. And a year later, I see them and they say, you know what? My Raynaud's went away because I did everything you said. And you don't know the impact. So that's why I'm so passionate about speaking. But yeah. And like most people in the field, we all have our stories, right? And that's what's brought us here.
Oh, I love how yours turned you into the fabulous provider you are today. So tell the listeners why it's so important to not ignore subtle symptoms of low energy and fatigue. And maybe your symptoms started subtly and then obviously they built. But why is it so important to not ignore these symptoms?
Fatigue is one of the top 3 symptoms of underlying mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's a big fancy term. And our mitochondria produce energy. And when they start to become dysfunctional, you'll start feeling a little less robust. And fatigue's one of them. So is brain fog, as well as pain. So if you're having that triad, you've got the perfect trifecta, and you better get in right away. And it really is saddening to me when I talk with someone and they're about to engage in our services and they say, oh no, it can't be that serious. I'm like, it is. If you've got the trifecta, it means pay attention now before it becomes more permanently disabling from those symptoms. And so it starts with this subtle fatigue. Here's my whole proposed theory. You're going to hear a snippet of what's going to be in my book called Beyond Fatigue, which will be hopefully coming out this year. But so you'll acclimate to this level. And I always equate it to, think about if you threw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out. It feels that boiling water. But if you put it in the water and it starts to boil, it may take it a long time, if ever, to jump out. And it's either going to die or have adverse consequences because they don't feel it. And then with that fatigue, what happens is you feel a little less well. That means probably you're deficient in some vitamins and minerals. And through our lives, especially this last year and a half, stressors in our life will deplete our vitamins and minerals, our B vitamins and magnesium, like nobody's business. And then you add in a little bit, the secret sauce is the environmental toxins we're exposed to, things you can't avoid, air, car pollution, etc. And you mix that up in a pot and it creates this perfect storm. The toxins take the deplete nutrients, don't allow the mitochondria to produce energy. The stress depletes the nutrients further. And when you're nutrient deplete and you're not making energy, the toxins that we're exposed to take the mitochondria out in a real special manner. The mitochondrial DNA comes from our mom. And I always joke, you can blame your mom if you're tired. But it is not, that DNA is not protected in a coating called histones. And therefore the mitochondrial DNA is really prone to toxins. So that's why you should pay attention. It means something larger is at play. And if you pay attention now, not only can you reverse what's going on, you'll prevent that progression to brain fog, fatigue, or pain, and potentially think osteoarthritis. So destruction of tissue, dementia, and the whole 9 yards. And if I may share just what patients will typically say. So I see everyone from the woman who wants to optimize health prior to a pregnancy, which is my cup of tea. I love that, because let's prevent it first in mom and then impart that great health into the baby, into fetus. And so at any rate, I had a woman come in that was wanting to be seen for preconceptual counseling. Her girlfriend talked her into it because she had been through and felt amazing, and they were going to get pregnant together. That was their goal. And I said, okay. And at the end of the appointment, she was like, I don't even know if I want to proceed. I just feel so well. And by the end of our time together, and it usually takes us 3-4 short visits, even in the healthy people. So that's healthy to walk them through the whole protocol. And we do it as quick as possible. She said, between visit 1 and 2, when she met with me at visit 2, she said, boy, I didn't realize how fantastic I could feel. And here's what we found. 2 of the things in her underlying imbalances were she had 17 vitamin and mineral deficiencies, 17. So no wonder she couldn't realize or actualize how much better she could feel. And she also had something called fatty liver. And that, in my personal opinion, there's multifactorial. Certainly you have genetic predisposition, which we'll talk about some of my favorite genetics in a bit. But that's high carbs, coupled with low vitamins and minerals, which she had, coupled with toxic exposures, and her career put her exposed to benzene and all kinds of other stuff. So she was in a career. And so we reversed all of that in 6 weeks. Her liver functions that were 150, again, normal goes up to 40, came back down to normal in 6 weeks. So it's really, really quick. But if we hadn't reversed that, she would have gone on to have something else happen. And it may have been too late or harder to reverse. So that's why it's super, super important, because it's a sign of things are really starting to become unwell within our body systems and imbalanced.
Sure. So you mentioned a couple things with that story, the nutritional deficiencies and then the toxins. Can we go a little deeper with both of those? So what are common nutritional deficiencies? Obviously she had a lot, but what are the most common nutritional deficiencies that you see?
Yeah, so the first, obviously vitamin D is in 99.9% of patients deficient. That'll just make you fatigued in general, potentially depressed, brain foggy. I mean, that alone will make you feel poorly. Magnesium's probably number 2.
Yep,
and
I agree.
Yeah, do you agree with that too?
Mm-hmm.
And it's needed in 200 different chemical reactions in the body, and when you're stressed, it gets chewed up very quickly. Then I see zinc is soon to follow. Lately, because I've been tracking, I'm seeing a lot of vitamin C deficient folks, and vitamin A. So there are genes that govern vitamin A and our ability to convert it to the active form. And so that can be a problem. And one example of that is if you've ever seen a child or one of your children after eating a lot of orange vegetables, so butternut squash, pumpkin, carrots, turns a little orange around the corners of their nose. I used to think, oh, that's great. It means that they're getting a ton of beta carotene. And no, it's not great. It means that their body can't take beta carotene out of that carrot and convert it into the active form of vitamin A. So it's just building up. So then they're essentially deplete or deficient, as opposed to someone who doesn't have that. And I'd add in the B vitamins. So B vitamins get deplete. If you're, one other thing to think about is my vegetarian and vegans, if you're not real diligent about supporting your diet, whether it's added supplements, vitamins, minerals, or really tracking, you're looking at zinc, carnitine, CoQ10, B12. Those are probably along the tops. And lo and behold, carnitine, CoQ10, B12 are needed to make energy. So yeah, it puts them behind the 8 ball.
Sure. I want to go back to, for the mother listening who says, that's my kid, I can't convert the beta carotene. What does that mother do? What's a tip for?
Yeah, so you can give cod liver oil has a form that's active. You want to look for retinol palmitate. You got to be really, really careful. So in adults, definitely not more than a few thousand. Pregnant women, definitely not more than 5,000. So it has, vitamin A is associated with birth defects at high levels. In special scenarios, so someone who has an autoimmune disease that's cropped up, or we're trying to get in control, or someone has an acute viral illness, I'll do higher doses for a very short period of time, and then you back them down to some sort of maintenance dose. So it's really supplementing with an active form.
Sure. So then let's go into toxins. So if toxins are one of the other causes of this fatigue, what toxins do you often see high in your patient population?
Yeah, I'd probably categorize those into 3. So one is obviously our pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate. Let's lump them all into things that like we spray on our vegetables. And what's interesting, so that's 1. 2 would be pollution of our groundwater. Unfortunately, I'm seeing a byproduct of gasoline. If you're not properly filtering water, potentially even distilling it, is MTBE are the initials, so MTBE. And then the third is mold toxins or mycotoxins, which many people don't even know about. So those are the top 3 that I'm seeing. And then there's others that are to a lesser degree.
So when you say you're seeing those, I'm assuming you mean on lab testing. So tell our listeners what tests you take advantage of that you love to run on your patients, again, to kind of get to the root cause of the lack of energy.
Yeah, let's start just quickly back up to tier 1 and tier 2. So tier 1, when someone comes in and I run them through, I have this whole 3D protocol we'll talk about. And tier 1 looks at all the basic blood work that you could get drawn at your regular lab, like LabCorp or Quest, but that your regular doctor may not order. And I've created a series of the 4 words your doctor should never say, and that should be your labs are normal. There's always subtle findings, even in that person who feels well. The second series of videos I've created is the one test your doctor will never order. And I look at vitamins and minerals along with a comprehensive, metabolic panel and blood count and thyroid panel that's more extensive. And then I really like to look at vitamins and minerals in the white blood cells. So it's an average 3-month marker. So it won't be affected by if you just took some vitamins the day before or were on them for a week before. And that's a good starting point. I've started adding in things that look at high toxic load, things like GGT. So it's a more specific liver marker. I look at oxidized LDL, which is a damage to the cholesterol, the bad cholesterol protein. It's got to be damaged to actually deposit on our arteries. And it's an indicator how much toxins are exposed to. Uric acid as well, LDH. So those are some of the ones I'm looking at. Are there subtle findings? And then
is that all tier 1? Okay, that's all tier 1.
Yeah, it's all tier 1. And you know what? Here's a funny story. So our patients are our best teachers, right? And 99% of my patients, I do this huge lab eval, and it's 30 tubes or something. And so I try to do it at least once a year for me and my husband. And the first of the year is a good time to have them run right before the first of the year. And then we review them in January and we make adjustments to anything that we're doing in our lives or how we're supplementing. And I hadn't drank enough water, and I had the phlebotomist I employ come to our home and do a home draw. And right before, so I chug water and it makes me nauseated. And I'm like, I better lay down. And he's really great because he lays down my patients. And I'm like, boy, I might need to split this lab work into 2 orders. So, but it is quite a volume of blood. Yeah. Most of that's covered. Now, if you do nutrients in the blood that are the 3-month marker, there's a small fee for that. But then I bet you the listeners want to know tier 2. And this is what a lot of people don't talk about. So in my 3D protocol, that last D is detox. And in my early days, I would offer people a formal detoxification protocol that would last anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, possibly longer. And I'd say I'll do this once or twice a year. And then a patient of mine came in and say, hey, I heard this on a podcast. I really want to get this toxin screening. And I'm thinking, no way is this going to be abnormal. This person lives the healthiest life I know. She does everything I've told her. She has impeccable health. Her lab markers are great. And lo and behold, despite eating all organic, when we ran, there is an environmental toxin test that Great Plains Labs puts out. And initially I used to say, why get it? Everyone's got it. But it's not so. I'm seeing varying degrees. So this really healthy person who filters her water, filters her air, and eats all organic had very, very high levels of a lot of different pesticides. So some were low, but the others you have to scratch your head and say, where are you getting this from? So there's a protocol followed to lower it. And then we identify. And for her, it was, they were filtering. She had been through at least 2 filters. And so she moved on and did extensive research, found a whole house water filter system. And then we're able to lower her. And now we're testing her water to ensure it stays there and make sure we've cleared it. But you'd say, where is glyphosate, which is the ingredient in Roundup, and which we know has been associated with cancer. There was a huge lawsuit over it. And that it's ubiquitous. It gets absorbed into the air and then it rains down on us and it's just everywhere. And it just depends. If you live on a golf course, they're probably spraying it on the course. If you're near farms, you can get downwind effects and be inhaling it. I mean, there's so much exposure, but, and it's funny, every layer we unpeeled with this patient, she got better and better. And she already felt better within the first, several visits. So I like the GPL tox. So that looks at all environmental toxins. I look at glyphosate, pretty inexpensive test, under $100. The GPL tox is just over 200. And then the third one to round it out is I look at mycotoxins in the urine. And for that test, I really do prefer a company called Real Time. And for the listeners that don't know, so mold grows when there's a moist environment.
Yep.
But it's not the mold. It's the mold releases a spore. The spore releases a mycotoxin. It's not visible to the eye. You can't smell it by your nose, and it can be growing within between the walls or anywhere there's ongoing damage that you don't know about. And it almost always comes from a water damaged building, whether you know or don't know. And it's any time in your life. So if you've been exposed for a period of time, and how quickly? 5 days. So I had one patient come in and was made very ill after staying in a hotel that there was visible black mold. Sad story. He actually cut his trip short at the 5th day. He just was so unwell with brain fog and fatigue. So 5 days it can do it. Probably shorter, but usually it's small amounts that are ongoing and unknown.
Sure. So lots of different toxins to look at, right? So are both of those tier 2, or was mold tier 3?
No, they're tier 2. So I'll do the first round, and the first D is diet and nutrients. So we optimize that, because if diet is always at the hallmark, but diet alone won't do it if you're really, really sick. And then typically we move on to digestion, or ensuring that we have a robust, non-inflammatory microbiome. So all the bacteria in our gut are the good bacteria. And then the third is I'll look at toxins. And if you align that, then all the other stuff, so the hormones you'll need to do less balancing with. So it's kind of in that tier 2, but it probably done after the second or third visit is when we're looking.
Well, let me guess what tier 3 is. Is that where we get to genomics? Or
tier 3 is genomics.
Let's spend some time here, because we haven't talked a lot about that on the podcast. I guess I have had a few guest episodes of which have not launched today yet, but let's talk about that. And so if a patient wants to truly invest in their health and get up to tier 3, what tests are you running on them, and kind of what are some of those important pathways that you really look at with genomics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So kind of to back up, we really should be educating the general public that the epigenetics, or diet and lifestyle, should be able to override any defective or mutated genes. Should be. If someone is chronically unwell or has symptoms, you have to believe that mutated gene, so there's symptoms coupled with labs, so some of you can actually test and see if it's not functioning, then that gene is actually expressing it and not functioning as well. The name of the gene always governs the enzyme in that chemical reaction. So if you have substance A becomes substance B, there's 2 things that drive that. There's usually vitamins and minerals, we call those cofactors, and then there's that enzyme, and the gene is named for the enzyme. And so I have 2 tiers of testing within tier 3. So if someone doesn't have chronic, I treat a lot of high-level professionals, and they not only want to get better, but they want to maximize their health span, and they want to minimize any adverse outcomes. So I will do a panel that we can read within the hour and give them coupled with any minor symptoms, coupled with labs. So it's always symptoms, labs, followed by genomics. We look at all 3 combined, and that's where we'll start with them. Now I use another company that has 19,000 genes. We can't possibly read those. You can't implement enough supplements, but I look at key pathways. So if someone's unwell, we're going to be really looking at the detox pathways and things that lead to high levels of what we call oxidative stress. So I'm looking at all the detox pathways and things that have to do with toxic exposure. So we start there and then, of course, branch out. And I've studied it's been almost a decade, under 5, 6, 7 people. And you keep learning. Once you feel like you know it all, and then you're like, gosh, I don't know anything at all. And you keep diving deeper. And an interesting story here, and why I started doing this, is that functional medicine, just doing the basics, I found 80% of my 20% I couldn't make better in the regular clinic got better. So they have 80 of 20. That's pretty good, right? But for me, it was never enough. Why are these 20% of patients not better? And that's when I did the deep dive. And there was a young man that came in at the age of 11, had a diagnosis of autism, and he would sit with his earbuds in to block out the other stimulus, and he'd bounce, no eye contact. How you doing? Okay. What's new? Nothing. Anything to say? Nope. And they'd pause and be like, gotta go. And he'd excuse himself out of the room. It was literally like this 1-minute interchange. And I'd been treating him for about 18 months, and I'd gone to conference after conference. I'd presented his case, and I said, I want to crack this code. So there was a night, believe it or not, I met up with all my former colleagues in Boston, we're at this restaurant, and when we got done eating, we pulled out the pathway maps, we plotted them out, and we brainstormed as a team. So this is the beauty of having such great collaborative practitioners like yourself, is that together we can go really far. And we implemented a few last things. And the mom had mentioned he was better, and I was seeing his sister virtually. By then I had moved away, still held a license there, and you only have to see patients once a year in person. So we're still following with him. And he walked across the screen while he was talking to his sister. He sat down next to his sister. He says, "Hey, Dr. Milanovic." So that's what I used to go by. Now I go by Dr. Rajka. He's like, "How are you doing?" And I almost fell off my chair and I started to cry. And I said, "You didn't tell me it was this much better." And the mom said, "Oh yeah, I think I did." And I'm like, "No, you didn't. This is huge." So you went from this non-interactive, you wonder about what is his life going to be like, to this highly functioning young man who's now well over 18. And yeah, so that's what led me down that path. And I just kept digging and digging. And even in my own health, just digging about why was it that I went on to, like, I was tipped off that glutathione, and this is maybe a nice segue into glutathione, might be an issue for me, is that I started getting jet lagged from 3 to 4 days when we'd fly long haul flights. We're talking internationally, the 12 to 13 hours. So going east seemed to be the problem for me. And it used to take me 3 or 4 days, then it was a week, then it was 2 weeks, then it was 3 weeks. And by that time I was in my early 40s, it would take me 4 full weeks to recover from one long haul flight. And
Wow.
I dreaded going back. And as you can imagine, my family's in the US, we're living abroad. I want to see them. So I have to go. And I was at my first functional medicine conference, told by chance, I mean, it's not chance, it's always karma, right? That energy is attracts us. Talked to a nutraceutical representative and said, "You must be so excited to get back to your kids. The conference is coming to an end." And I said, "Yes, but no, I just know what's in store for me, as I'm going to have to feel poorly for 4 weeks." And he says, "Oh my gosh, just take this glutathione and it'll help you detox from everything you're exposed to in the airways and the circadian rhythm disruption." He's thinking, "By the way, also go to Whole Foods, pick up some melatonin," because I didn't have access to that. I started exactly what he said, like that day. And when I returned, and so it was just a day or two before I flew. So 3 days after returning, all the jet lag was gone. 3 days, from 4 weeks to 3 days. Now, sadly, I went off the glutathione, and that's where I got into trouble. So I didn't realize it was an issue for me, and I should have realized. It wasn't
actually
until I
needed it like long-term, not just after flying, or
yeah, not just after flying. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, maybe this is a nice segue to start talking about those key pathways. So
yes,
glutathione, it was the article that actually brought me into functional medicine. And if you're deficient in it, it is our body's major antioxidant. It is better than vitamin C, because when it donates the electron to neutralize things, it can be recycled and reused if things are in a line. And so that means if you've got good genes. And the glutathione can become deplete with stressors, with vitamin and nutrient deficiencies, so if you don't have the precursors to make it, and then also genetically, might not be able to make it, transport it, recycle it. And there are 3 key glutathione genes, and I'm missing 2 full genes. So it's one of the only genes that you can have 0 copies, 1 copy, or 2 copies. Typically there's 2 copies. You get one from mom, one from dad. I had 0 copies of 2 of the 3 most crucial glutathione genes. And my third one, so the third most important one, was mutated. So I had 1 mutation. So, I worry, I think about that, or I try not to think about it now, but, momentarily you say, where would I be if I didn't know this? If I didn't know how to support my diet lifestyle, I didn't know how to supplement, I didn't know how to test and make sure. The other important thing is, when we make energy, it's a good thing that we make energy. A byproduct is free radicals, so superoxide. Superoxide is good and bad. So any free radical will help us knock out bacteria, viruses, pathogens that we're exposed to. But in excess, it can lead to tissue destruction unless it's neutralized. So superoxide will go on to form hydrogen peroxide. And then you have to neutralize that. And glutathione is one of the things needed to neutralize it to water. And the gene is glutathione, or the enzyme is glutathione peroxidase. So if you don't do that, you'll have a buildup. And the other enzyme is catalase. And if you have a buildup of hydrogen peroxide, some of the symptoms you may experience are one, acid reflux, which I've had lifelong, and two is premature graying. So you might not see it now, but I was probably fully gray by the time I was 30, and my mom was as well. So that was all these telling signs if you pay attention. Yeah.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. What about, actually, let me go back for a moment. So at a conference, you were told by a rep, hey, try glutathione. So like on a hunch, you're like, oh, this person seems intelligent. Give it a try. Then you later confirmed when you were started, kind of testing your patients, I assume, then you tested yourself, and that's how you confirmed that you did have these SNPs. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, but the interesting thing was I didn't run my own genetics for a few years after doing, we always look at ourselves, laugh, and I finally ran my whole family's genetics, and both my kids, bad or good, are both interested in medicine. And my son who's a little bit older, is really fascinated by it all. So it's been fun to, share that and say, it's not the end all and be all, but if we don't start cleaning up our environment, all of us might start having those mutations expressed. That's a huge worry that I have.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about superoxide dismutase. So there are SNPs here as well, correct? Problems with this enzyme.
Yeah. So we form that free radical superoxide, and you need superoxide dismutase to neutral or to convert that to hydrogen peroxide. And if you have an accumulation of that superoxide, you can't do that conversion. That can then bind with nitric oxide, and you can get destruction of tissues. So think about arthritis, osteoarthritis, autoimmune arthritis processes. And so if you have that buildup or destruction of our fatty tissue, lipid peroxidation. So some of it you can measure. Remember I said the oxidized LDL looks at damage to the bad fat, or bad cholesterol, I should say. And so one of the things at another conference I love, when I was learning in snippets and now I see the whole big picture, I ran a woman who had autoimmune diagnosis of autoimmune, the rheumatoid arthritis, 6 weeks prior to seeing me. And she initially was coming to me because she knew I was pretty well versed in the nutrigenomics. And 6 weeks prior, she wanted to discuss MTHFR. And everyone may or may not know that was the first gene everyone got all excited about, but it's so much more than just MTHFR. And so I ran her through my protocol, and I didn't know her genetics except for MTHFR. Didn't really pay too much attention, supported it somewhat based on her labs. She was living abroad, but was a US citizen. And so she saw me once and then left, and actually saw me once or twice. And I gave her like kind of an extended protocol. I didn't hear from her for 18 months. And when she called to reschedule, I thought, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to say to her? She probably is not better. Like, that's why I didn't hear. We should never assume. And I said, gosh, what happened? I gave you all this protocol. She goes, I did everything you said. And I'd given her SOD. And she said every layer got her better. And so she did my diet. She did the nutrients to support proper immune function. We worked on her gut microbiome. We talked about detox and things she needed to do from lifestyle. And then we gave her SOD. And she said every layer made her better and better. She was like, feels like I never got that diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. I don't have a single symptom. I'm not on any meds. I sustain it with diet and those basic supplements. So I was like, whoa, how amazing. So we went back in and we looked at her mutations, and sure enough, she had a double mutation for SOD. So that's why SOD made her better. Mm-hmm. And for her, we just got her, she was living abroad, so she couldn't get organic vegetables. She was drinking bottled water that probably sat outside, the whole plastics. And another mutation she had was PON1, PON1, and that governs the breakdown of our organic organophosphates, or the majority of our pesticides. So that's why she became unwell, as she had these mutations coupled with that perfect storm of living a life where she didn't have access to cleaner fruits and vegetables, was drinking this bottled water, probably with a ton of BPA in it. And so it was very interesting to reverse engineer it. So I've done that a few times, where you use the symptoms in labs to suspect where that mutation is. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's go on to the NOS pathway. You mentioned it a little bit, but can you expand on that also, how important?
Yeah. So two ways, NOS, nitric oxide, is really important to dilate our blood vessels. So we don't have high blood pressure. So we deliver oxygen to all of our tissues. And in men, you think about erectile dysfunction, and men and women both, potentially migraines because they're, not delivering oxygen. So that's how it may manifest if you're deficient. But if you have an excess of that nitric oxide, here's what can happen. So if you have an excess of nitric oxide and you're not, if you're not breaking down that hydrogen peroxide. So remember, superoxide forms hydrogen peroxide. So if you get this backlog of hydrogen peroxide, you don't have enough glutathione or catalase to break it down. Actually, I'm sorry, let's back up. Nitric oxide, I'm sorry. Oh, I misspoke. I got so excited there. Nitric oxide, combines with the superoxide to form that peroxynitrite. And so the mnemonic or acronym for that is NO, nitric oxide, to oh no. And so that's the way to remember that conversion. And so I misspoke. So it goes from no to oh no when you're not clearing the free radicals. And so abundance of nitric oxide, not breaking down superoxide by your SOD forms that oh no pathway. And I kind of jumped ship and went to the next thing we're going to talk about. But so then you get breakdown of tissue. And so that's why it's super important. You need enough to dilate your arteries. So you're applying oxygen to all your periphery, your arms, your legs. You're not leading to high blood pressure because you've got vasoconstriction or narrowing of those blood vessels.
Awesome. And then I don't know about you, but I know a lot of providers that I have worked with have been very excited about this Fenton reaction.
Yeah, what's interesting? Yeah, the Fenton reaction is super important. So when I was first learning this, I thought, oh, it's superoxide. That's the mother of all free radicals. That needs to be neutralized by SOD. But actually, it's not superoxide. It's actually this hydroxyl radical. What happens is if you have hydrogen peroxide and you're not breaking it down, this is where I jumped the ship. It can combine with iron, and then it makes the hydroxyl radical. And that's actually even more damaging to our body tissue. So the Fenton reaction is just iron combining with hydrogen peroxide, forming that hydroxyl radical. And so, well, I know it's a lot of fancy terms, kind of geeky, but what I always tell people is you want to know the reactions so that if you give a substrate, you know which way it's going to go. Same with, we're not going to broach upon hormones. Maybe I'll have to foreshadow to another episode. We'll do the genetics of hormones. So there's nothing worse than if you give someone hormones and you're not paying attention to the way they break down, and you give that man boobs, or you put weight on his hips like a woman, like they don't want that, or along the waistline and hips. Likewise with women, if you give that woman testosterone and you're not aware that she converts quickly to something called DHT, and she's losing her hair. Right. Or developing acne or her facial hair, or, so you just need to know the way things go with chemical reactions, especially when you're giving anything, even, not to be carefully. Or someone had asked me like, would I, glutathione, we should be careful. And I said, yes, you should be careful. So, if you're not recycling it, it can become problematic, and you need vitamin B3 or NAD to recycle that. And so it's a real complex interplay. And that's why if you are supporting these genes, realistically, you should be having blood work at least twice a year to look at what's going on, symptoms plus blood work plus genes, to know where do we need to support you best.
I love that. So if you're listening, you can have genetic testing done through, I don't know what all companies you use, but a lot of my patients have done Ancestry.com or 23andMe, or they've already done some genetic testing. But what providers like we do is take the genetic testing and run it through an interpretation site where we find all of this information, like what Dr. Reich is saying. Find out if you have problems with SOD or NOS or glutathione or whatnot. You have some genetic SNPs, some variations with those specific enzymes. Those results are not going to be given to you by 23andMe or any of those companies. They're just going to say, hey, you have the breast cancer gene or the Parkinson's gene, or you have fructose intolerance, or potentially, right? Those companies are not going to dive in and be able to interpret your results at this complex, like you said, this complex level.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you want to look at the whole picture. You can get into trouble. So for example, MTHFR talks about methylation, and that's just the playing a game of hot potato with the carbon and 3 hydrogens, so CH3. And the whole goal of that is to be able to fuel your DNA and RNA. I mean, and that cycle is going to run at the expense of all the other cycles that are tied to it, forming your brain chemicals or neurotransmitters, detoxing down a pathway called transsulfuration. And if you have too little, then all the other pathways won't work. If you have too much and you overmethylate, think about things like a rapid turnover of cells, so potentially cancer. So that's why I wouldn't take it lightly, and I don't. And there's counseling all along the way. And again, modifying protocol. So it's not one size fits all, and it's not a one protocol for life. So it's going to change based on where you are at in life, where your symptoms are, where your exposures are, et cetera.
I totally agree. Given all of what you just said, are there any basic recommendations for the listeners on how we can reduce kind of the impacts of oxidative stress on our cells and longevity? Again, there's not a one size, like you said, there's not a one size fits all approach, but what are some general recommendations?
Yeah, so I'd probably say if you're oxidative stress, you got to look at all the two things is get tested for nutrients, because even if you're eating a whole foods diet, you're going to be depleted. So you have the right equipment. I'll give you maybe 3 tips. The second would be to ensure you have adequate protein. So you need protein, breaks down to amino acids, which helps us detoxify. So nutrients, protein. And then if I had my way, I would do 2 more things. I'd say get tested for the toxins. And if you really want to be at that high, if you want your health span to match lifespan, besides leading a healthy life, is look at your exposures. So you know what needs to be removed. It's very telling, and I probably do it once a year. And then look at the genetics so you're aware of what could get you into trouble in the future.
Love it. This is kind of a more complex, high-level episode, but I think it was needed because so many providers just optimize hormones or just optimize, thyroid specifically, or look at the adrenals. But I love how you've tiered your testing, because if patients want to take things to the next level, then there are more tiers of tests. And most of this all is discussed in my book, Your Longevity Blueprint, as well. So tell us where listeners can find you.
Probably the best way is twofold. So we'll have a little bonus for your listeners in a minute, but off my website, it's www.drrajka.com, and that's just drrajka.com. Remember, it is Rajka rhymes with Micah. It's oftentimes pronounced. It's okay. I'll just correct you from the get-go. So it's said right. So you can find all the information about me, my clinics, any special offerings. And then on Facebook, I'm sure you'll provide the link, is at Dr. Rajka. So I do a lot of Facebook Lives. Those are the ones that come so natural. It's so easy to speak and kind of share my message. And I'm just now building up that YouTube channel. So that's Dr. Rajka as well, awesome. DRRAJKA. And that's where am housing. And they just went up, I think just yesterday, the 7 videos that talk about labs that your doctors potentially likely won't order. And the 4 words you should never hear your doctor say is your labs are normal. So I review some of the basic labs and some of the more specific labs, which are in that tier 1 set of labs.
Awesome. Sounds very interesting. Well, tell us, you have a free gift for the listeners. My voice is barely holding out here.
Well, I think you've done really, really well, Stephanie. So I crafted a infinite energy guide. So it's 10 days to infinite energy. So it's in PDF format. And then I say, go through it one day at a time, and then implement the steps. Remember, 80% will get results by just doing the basics. So that really goes over the foundational things that need to be happening in your life to start feeling better.
And we will absolutely post that link in the show notes. So as we conclude the show here, Dr. Rajka, tell us what your top longevity tip would be. And it could be something you've already said, but what's your top longevity tip?
I would have to go with know your genetics. I really would. Know your genetics, because the world is becoming increasingly more and more toxic, and there's going to be a point when that burden exceeds everyone's ability to detox. That's unfortunate. And but yeah, know your genetics so you can mitigate the risk before it's a problem.
Love it. Well, thank you so much today for coming on the show and sharing how important knowing our genomics really is, and what we can do about oxidative stress and turn our fatigue into becoming fabulous. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was great to be on the show.